But couldn't it be true that you could just be free? I want for you what a dove gets. I want the moon to sit on to find you. If only I could see past the rough into the diamond of your heart. Couldn't it be true that you could just be free?
Summer Moon Utah Wells was reported missing June 15th, 2021 around 6:30 p.m. when her parents allegedly called 911 to report that they'd been looking for her for about 10 minutes and they couldn't find her. She was reported to be 3 feet tall and 40 pounds. We know she was likely closer to 3.5 or 4 feet tall. And she was reported to have been wearing a pink shirt and gray pants. Okay. Dawn Wells was on the lab, as most of you probably know. Josh at the lab, Chris McDonough, and Dawn Wells were on panel together on the lab live streamed April 19th, 2023. Josh and Chris were talking, just the two of them, for 45 minutes before Dawn came on. So then Dawn came up on panel. They were listening to an interview with Dawn Wells and Jeff Bobo before Dawn came up, and they cut it off to talk to Dawn. So Dawn comes up and he says he's just listening to this crap over and over and over for 2 years, and it's getting old. I'm sorry it's getting old to you, Dawn, but it's getting old to us too. That Summer is still missing, and there still aren't any of the right answers to find her or get her justice. We're trying to figure out what happened to your daughter that you don't have a lot of positive things to say about. You say Summer may have been hit in the head with an effing hammer. You say she may be in a hotel room, trigger warning, being sold for crack. You say her favorite word was stop because she wanted to break up fights at home. You say vile things in regards to Summer, your own daughter. She was only 5 years old, June 15th, 2021, the day of her disappearance. She was barely old enough to understand how to read or spell her own name, just 5 years old. So, Dawn, sorry you're annoyed with all of the questions, but there are people that genuinely care about Summer in a way it seems that you don't, in my opinion. Dawn he speaks about how he had interviews with people that he shouldn't have when Josh asks Dawn if he had ever heard the interview with him and Jeff Bobo before, which was the video Josh and Chris were listening to and discussing with the chat before Dawn came up on panel. Dawn was in the chat and he decided he wanted to come up and tell the truth, in his words. Dawn says people are mad because he isn't searching for Summer, but if people send him money, he will. And for the people that agree with him and want to tell me that Dawn doesn't have time not to search for Summer because he has to work that much, I think he can set aside some time from work for his missing daughter. I understand that people have to work for a living. I understand that Dawn has things that he needs a cash flow for in his life, just like anyone else. But he can support his habits, work, pay his child support, and still have plenty of time for Summer. What did he do before? He should be able to sit aside at least a few hours a week, pick a day on the weekend when you're not working, use it to go out and walk around, walk the woods, take down some old flyers, hang some new ones, post it to social media to encourage more people to hang flyers and keep her name out there. I could think of lots of ideas. Keep walking different places and going further and further out. You say you think she was abducted, Don, but what about the very real possibility that she wandered off in the steep and mountainous terrain? Ronnie Lawson said that's possible. Why wouldn't you consider that? Summer was 5. Even if she would never wander off, she was only 5. 5-year-olds are unpredictable. They're starting to get more brave at that age, and they're curious, and it would be totally normal behavior for a 5-year-old to wander off. That's what kids do. That's what they need to be supervised for. If Don truly believes Summer was abducted, he should be out here advocating a lot more for her. He should be regardless. But if he is guilty in any way, I can see why he wouldn't. Don says Josh and Chris are good at twisting the narrative. Well, there shouldn't be a narrative, there should just be the truth. The fact that Don uses the word narrative in regards to Summer bothers me. It doesn't sit right with me. Don says Chris acted like a snake because he said they were watching porn on the TV when Chris came to their house with Candace. Josh says, Chris said it wasn't porn, which he did. Josh asks if Don was in the shed, and he says no. Someone started blowing Don's phone up, and he said he thought it was Doug. Chris thinks people are trying to stop Don from talking to him. Maybe they are, or maybe they're just trying to mess up Josh's show. I think it was someone trying to mess up Josh's show, which they did not succeed at, if that was the goal. But at first I thought it was Tim Mullen. That was the first person to pop into my head, because of course, Tim wouldn't want Don up there talking to Chris M. But then Don comes on and says he thinks it's Doug blowing up his phone, so it probably was Doug. Meanwhile, Josh starts playing the old video of Don talking to Jeff Bobo, in which Don says Summer was abducted. He says it's reasonable deduction. He says 100% in his mind she has been abducted. If Don truly believes that Summer was abducted, why isn't he letting the Cold Case Foundation help? Why wouldn't he think that she could have gotten further than he expected outside somewhere, as Ronnie Lawson has implied? Why automatically jump to abduction? I think that's Don being extra. Again, that's just another red flag to me. Like I heard Trev Time say, Don over embellishes, and he does. I have always thought that since the first time I heard him speak. And he makes it obvious that they're lying sometimes, in my opinion. He wants us to believe him so badly that Summer was abducted when there's nothing pointing to that, and it would obviously make more sense to think she ran off into the woods for whatever reason, chasing a dog, running around, being a kid, running from somebody. Hard to say, but it sounds more likely than an abduction. Chris asks Don if they were cleared by the polygraph tests. Don answers that he doesn't think they were completely cleared because the polygraphs aren't admissible in court. So, this tells me, which I've already assumed, that Don nor Candace were ever told by any law enforcement that they were in any way cleared or made to feel that they were. Don says at first he didn't get any sleep for 2 days, and it was the worst misery and pain he has ever felt in his entire life. He says they made Candace wait 5 days longer to take hers because she tried and she wasn't able to. That tells me a lot. That tells me that the first one that Candace took, it was probably inconclusive, and she probably blamed it on being too tired because maybe she was too intoxicated, and it was probably just pointless to even do it, and they probably knew that. They probably knew they were not going to get an accurate reading. Don comes back from being interrupted by someone blowing up his phone, and he says he wants to find Summer more than anything. He says they've been through pure hell. Nobody can be prepared for losing a child. not to mention the hell Summer probably and still could be going through. Don says, "You are mentally numb and a piece of you is gone." I'm sure Don does truly feel this way, even if he does know what happened to Summer, or whether he has no idea. I personally believe he does have an idea. Chris mentions that he lost one of his sons. Someone also tried to abduct Chris's oldest son. He says his middle boy was only 20 years old when he passed away. He tells Don he understands where he's coming from, and that's one of the reasons he came over early on. He says the program, when it first aired with Candace, she was actually put in a really good light, which she was, in my opinion, and I think she was actually sober for those interviews with Chris back in July of 2021. That was the clearest we have ever heard Candace talk that I know of. Chris asks what the Cold Case Foundation can do for Don. Well, maybe they could help keep her case from going cold. Maybe Chris could use his references and his resources to help Summer by working together with Don off the record and figuring out some of what we don't know publicly, which I'm sure Chris has many resources. Don could use all of that to Summer's advantage if he really thinks she was abducted. Chris says maybe this was an accident and there's a lot more to the story. Don says, well, the thing is, I know Candace. I live with Candace. She's got a severe broken heart, and you guys don't see that side of her. I just want to point out that when Don adds the word severe, it makes it less believable to me. You haven't seen her broken heart like I have, says Don. She doesn't show it. If she truly had a broken heart, it would be a lot harder to hide, in my opinion. Just saying. Don says, I know how much she loves her little girl. I know I'm being really picky, but this bothers me too. Don says he knew how much Candace loves her little girl. He doesn't say our little girl or Summer. He says her little girl. I feel like he is distancing himself from Summer, and he does it a lot, so I always notice it. Even if something happened, she wouldn't do something shady. She would call an ambulance. She would never be shady like that. One of the many times Don sounds like he's being extra, and you already know it raises a red flag for me. He really emphasizes that Candace wouldn't do something like that because she's not shady. Well, I think many can agree with me that Candace actually would be shady like that. Judging by all the things we have heard anybody that's ever been close to Candace say, I would say Candace would be shady like that. But that's just my opinion. 1 second. I'm going to grab my drink really quick. But yeah, I think Candace would be shady like that. Just judging by everything we've seen so far, you know? Chris says, well, sometimes people get stuck and they panic. That's not shady. That's just a panic, says Chris. Which I get what he's trying to do here. I do. Okay, so he says that's not shady, that's just a panic, but in my opinion, that is shady. Even if you panic to not call 911 or go to the emergency room if there was an accident. But like I said, I see what Chris was trying to do there. I also think it's shady to go ask Hunter what the cops said the day after Summer went missing when Ellie still had Don and Candace's phones. Don says it's nothing like that, though. He says he knows in his heart somebody took his daughter. Then let Chris help. Let him help her case from going cold, and let him help get her face across America, Don. Chris is tied into a lot of other people and knows all about other organizations that could help. Or you could go directly to those other organizations yourself. You could probably find some help through the Child Advocacy Center or other organizations like that. There's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I'm sure they have plenty of resources. I'm sure there's plenty of local help around there too, if not at least some. Even the people you think hate you, a lot of them really don't hate you. They just want to find Summer and would be willing to have a civil conversation with you, just like this, and be willing to help for Summer. There's actually a lot of help out there if you just reach out. We're not allowed to get shit on. We're out to find Summer and find out what happened to her. A lot of people think you hold that information and that Candace holds that information, and they want to know how they can work with you to get any piece of that information that could lead us to Summer, even if that means you have to lie and plant the idea in someone's head somehow to get them to wherever Summer is without telling on yourself. We don't care. We just want to find Summer. Then we'll get justice. Chris says, okay, well, how do you know? How does he know that Candace wouldn't do something shady? Don says, because of her emotions. And you guys are leaving out a hell of a lot, Don says. He says the boys were the last ones to see Summer. All right, the way Don says this bothers me. It feels like he's trying to say the boys saw Summer last, so they would have been the ones that have the answers, not him or Candace. That seems like an awful lot of weight to put on their shoulders. He says he has talked to his boys extensively. I wonder how that went down. That would be very interesting to know. The questions Don asked the boys and what they said. But I'm not going to speculate on it because I don't think it's appropriate. It doesn't feel like the right thing to do because the boys need protected and nothing ever needs to be said about them in any negative light. They deserve to tell their own story when they're old enough and when they're ready, and if they ever feel like they want to. Until then, I'd rather leave them out of it as much as possible. I know they're bound to come up because they're Summer's brothers, and they were there the day that she went missing, but I personally don't feel comfortable speculating anything about the boys. This is what Don is saying himself, though. Don says the boys went to specialists. He says they feel bad and feel like it's their fault, even though he tried to assure them that it's not. Planting the idea in our heads that it's possible the boys were responsible somehow for Summer's disappearance is what I think he's doing. And I think it's really messed up. Why does Don say this so much? I wish Don would stop saying this about the boys because he's not supposed to be talking about them anyways, and he shouldn't be qualified to say how those boys felt, in my opinion. They need to remain protected as much as possible. Don's phone gets blown up again. Josh asks, why did they or why do they feel guilty? Don says, well, Summer said she wanted to go downstairs and play with her toys, and the boys were playing their games. Don says she went downstairs by herself. Don says Candace watched her walk into the house. We remember hearing Candace say that to Chris. Chris asks, did she fall down the stairs? Don answers quickly, no. He said, even if she did, I have side barriers. Well, even with side barriers, that wouldn't keep Summer from possibly falling, and I don't remember seeing any side barriers when Chris was there filming, but I guess I would have to go back and look. Chris asks if she has ever fell down the stairs before, and Don says no. She was very smart and agile. She would have to be growing up in that house or on that property, especially with 3 older brothers and a mom and a dad that like to party and probably let the kids run around and do whatever with whoever, whenever. Just my opinion. Chris asks, then what happened? Don says, Mom came in and couldn't find her anywhere. He told Candace to call 911 when she called him. He says, as soon as he got off the phone with her, he called 911 himself. He says he had to be switched over to Hawkins dispatch because he was in another county. He says when he got there, he drove down to the bottom property and he saw his boys down there. Let's listen to Don tell it himself because I think it's important to hear how smoothly and quickly he tells what happened as if it's truly how he remembers it. And I know he's been repeating it for a long time, so maybe he's got it in his mind that he really does remember it that way, whether it was or not. But keep in mind, his story hasn't changed much. Aside from the recent information he gave us about driving the Subaru the day before Summer was reported missing, making it unclear as to whether he also drove it on the 15th of June or if he was saying he drove the truck on the 15th. I believe he was trying to say he drove the Subaru the 14th and the 15th because we also hear Dudley say that. On the other hand, Candace's story has changed, and she doesn't remember what her story even was, I don't think. Unless she was reminded, I don't think she could repeat the same information that she gave Chris M in those very early interviews in 2021. Don hasn't forgotten much of his story, and he repeats it word for word every time, pretty much. He says the basement door was unlocked on the news in the very beginning. Sorry. But then in this interview, he says he doesn't know if the basement door was locked or not because he was at work. So that kind of changes a little bit because he sounded pretty sure of it in the very beginning, but now he's like, oh, well, I don't know, I was at work. Then he goes on to say he wasn't there, so he doesn't know, but he assumes it was locked from the night before. So let's listen.
Okay.
No.
Sorry, I forgot to share my screen on the other tab. Here we go.
No.
So she wants to go downstairs as
Where's the doors?
to play with stuff. Then what?
Well, as far as we know, I mean, Mom come in looking for her. They couldn't find her nowhere. They looked for a while and couldn't find her. And she called me, and I says, "Hang up for me. Call 911 right away, just in case you can't find her right away or whatever. Just to make sure, call 911."
I wonder how long was a while looking for her, because if they were just in the house and downstairs and looking for her, then they must not have spent very much time outside looking for her. You think it would take at the very least 10 minutes to search like the main perimeter of around their house, because it's a big property and there's a lot of places she could have went and fell, like you think they would immediately want to check there. And if they don't see her right away, call 911. I mean, that's what I feel like any normal person would have done, but it seems like they were just in such a scramble and they needed to call 911 right away before they even really went out and looked. Like they just knew she was abducted. They just knew it in their hearts. But how? Unless you knew of somebody that it possibly could have been, or had some idea at least.
And when I got off the phone with her, as soon as she hung up, I called 911 from where I was at, and they had to switch me over from the 911 operator to the 911 operator in Hawkins County.
Mm-hmm.
And I flew home as fast as I could.
Right.
And then when I got there, I drove.
You didn't really fly home as fast as you could, or you would have went without your tools. Just saying.
Straight to the bottom property, just because I know I have a good view of the hill, and I seen my neighbor to the left of me. I seen all three of my boys to the right of me together, like I told them, always be together if you're going to be out off the hill anyway. And
Remember, and that's the moment that he said he just knew she was gone. When he seen his neighbor standing out there, that's when he knew it was serious and that she was gone.
when I seen that they were down on the bottom property, basically looking around, and she wasn't on top of the hill, I figured she wasn't there. And then that's when it got real crazy.
I see people in the chat saying, I thought you were talking to Candace the whole way home, which one time he said he didn't get a call back the whole way home, so he thought he didn't get a call back the whole way home. But then another time he says he talked to Candace the whole way home, which was crazy because usually he doesn't have that good of a signal. So he says two different things.
I drove up to the top of the hill, and there was like one or two police cars there at that time. And of course, they're questioning us. They're doubting. I felt in my heart right then that she was taken.
What were they doubting?
Well, I was trying to tell them that I don't think she's here. I think she's been taken, because if she wouldn't leave the top of the hill, she wouldn't leave from around the house.
Mm-hmm.
I had her.
Why would she never leave the top of the hill? Because I feel like it would be hard to keep her up there. I mean, I feel like any normal country kid that's going to be living out in the country on top of a hill, out in the middle of nowhere, they're going to be running off the top of that hill. And even if they never did, it wouldn't surprise me if they just randomly did it one day. I wouldn't put it past the 5-year-old. I don't know why you do.
Her pretty well. I mean, I show all my kids videos on YouTube of because we got grizzly bears, we got wild dogs and other things. And so I was worried that so I showed them things to try to put a scare into them, not to wander off. And Summer would not wander off by herself. No way.
Mm-hmm.
No way.
So when Candace went down the first time, it sounds like she.
All right, am I the only one that thinks he puts a little bit too much emphasis on that too? On that Summer would never run off or go anywhere by herself? Because I feel like she would. I feel like that's a normal thing for a kid to do, and we heard from Jose that she did a lot of times. I mean, we don't know if that was true or not. I don't see why he would make something like that up, but I feel like he just puts so much emphasis on it that it makes it hard to believe.
He went looking for Summer.
She got in her mother's truck.
Did she go into the basement?
Well, yeah, she looked all over it first, of course.
And that's when she called you.
Yeah, when she couldn't find her right away, she called me.
Okay, was the door open or closed, if you remember? Was it locked?
Well, I wasn't there, and we try to keep that basement door locked.
Okay,
because I think it was I want to say it was June 18th, 2021, 3 days after Summer was reported missing when he was on the news. And I believe that was the day it was. And they were asking him, what happened? And he said she went down to the basement and she went out the basement door, which was unlocked. Those were like his exact words, I'm pretty sure. So he sounded so sure and was really pushing it that door was unlocked and she went out it. But now he's making it sound like she wouldn't do that. And it was probably locked from the night before, but he doesn't know because he wasn't there. That's a lot different than from what he said before.
People have said
So
that you're the only one with the
leave it
key.
wide open all the time.
Right, but people have said you're the one.
No,
Go ahead.
there is no key to the basement door. I think we lost that.
Okay, what about the deadbolt, brother?
Well, we just lock the regular lock. We don't lock. Well, we'll lock the deadbolt if we're in the house. We can lock the deadbolt from the inside on the basement. We use the upstairs door if we're going somewhere or whatever and lock that one.
Okay, that morning when you woke up to go to work,
Right?
was that door opened or closed, or locked or open?
I assume it was locked because we lock the doors at night.
Okay, so at some point then, if you're assuming it was locked that morning, which way did you go out that door, or did you go back out through the kitchen to go to work?
I go upstairs and go to the kitchen to get in my truck and head to work.
Okay, so you go.
Okay, so he's making it pretty clear that now he doesn't know because he was at work, and he definitely wants to make sure that we know that he was at work. Like, he has to really push that. He wasn't there. He doesn't know. Candace was there. Candace knows, which, I mean, Candace should be the one that knows the answer to that.
You go to work, but that day you didn't take your truck, right?
Yeah, I used the Subaru the day before.
Mm-hmm.
I had fired Dudley because I was sure he was on meth and acting all crazy and stuff. I mean, just out of his mind. And I even looked on YouTube as to how people.
See how he makes it unclear whether he drove it also on the 15th? But I think what he's saying is he drove it on the 14th and the 15th, but he doesn't make it clear. He doesn't finish his statement and say if he also drove it on the 15th. But he has said that before, that he drove it on the 15th. But when he said it before, he made it sound like that was the only day that he drove it.
People act when they're on meth, and he fit every single one of them. Well done. Dude, come on, man. You've seen 1,000 people on meth, bro. You don't have to look on YouTube for that one, buddy. Come on. That's like a cop looking around for donuts in a donut shop and not knowing what they look like. Come on.
You hear me? All right.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, Don had to Google meth, right? After Chris calls Don out for saying he doesn't know how people on meth act and he had to look it up, Don says he doesn't deal with meth. Don, do you only deal with coke and crack or what then? Don says you tend to forget after a while unless it's something you do all the time. That's not the case for most anybody that I know that's been a drug addict or known drug addicts. It makes a big enough impression on a person witnessing something like that firsthand, knowing someone on meth, to see how they live. To see it but once would still likely make enough of an impression on a person that they would remember that and associate a person on meth with that incident. In other words, I think Don would know what someone acts like on meth, whether it be from firsthand experience, which is likely in my opinion, or be it from seeing someone else on meth knowing that they're on meth. He would remember that. He admits to at one time knowing, but after so long forgetting. I don't buy it. We've all heard the rumors about Candace and her relationship with meth. I wonder if there's any truth to that. Just a thought, because then Don should definitely know, right? I just think he over embellishes here too and makes it seem it's too hard to believe that he didn't know. So it makes me feel like he probably did meth. Don says he doesn't want to talk about Dudley, but he was all crazy on meth, and that's why he had to fire him the day before Summer was reported missing. I find it suspicious that Don has to clarify this, why he fired Dudley the day before Summer was reported missing. He just randomly will say it without anybody even asking. I think it's because he knew he was going to have to leave work for some reason that day, and he didn't want Dudley to know about it. He wanted to have an alibi for June 15th, and Dudley would have ruined that for him because they didn't even get along, so there's no way he would ever cover for him, and he could probably pull it off and be back in time before anyone else noticed because of the simple fact that he wasn't working directly alongside anyone but Dudley that I know of. So Dudley had to be the one to go, and they didn't like each other anyway, so it was easy for Don. That's a possibility. But it's also possible that it is a coincidence that Don just so happened to fire Dudley because he really thought Dudley was somehow a threat, whether he thought Dudley was going to snitch him out or hinder whatever Don was trying to do on the job or whatever. Chris says, so you decide to take the car that day. Don says, well, I took it the day before, I think, because I've been driving my truck for a long time. We've been over this already, Don says. I just wanted to put some miles on the Subaru, which is what he said before, but he also said he took it on the 15th before when he was referring to taking it to put miles on it. Now he's saying he took it to put miles on it on the 14th, so that's different. Dudley says in his interview with Heels that Don took the Subaru on the day before also. I don't know why Don would only mention this now, that he drove the Subaru on the 14th also, but I figured he would have said that in the beginning when he was asked why that day did he drive the Subaru. Anyways, Don continues, the day before we already had a welfare case because someone said we were letting the kids run around with loaded guns, which was stupid, he said. He says the very next day, Summer came up missing. Chris said CPS worked through that. We don't need to talk about that stuff. Trying to keep Don on topic and not talk too much about the boys, probably. Chris says, when did you wake up that day? Referring to June 15th. Don says, when the sun hits my face pretty much is when I get up. So Chris asks, what's the earliest he wakes up? Don says 6 or 7. Don says Summer was right next to him that morning when he woke up. Chris says, tell me about those memories. Let's hear what Don has to say about his last memory of being in bed with Summer that morning. Don doesn't actually tell him what he is asking him to tell him about. It's like he can't remember, so he just made something up. I don't think he remembers exactly the last time he saw Summer, besides whenever he saw her after whatever happened to her, potentially. And we've heard Don say a few different things about the last time that he saw Summer. She had her foot under her and he woke up like, oh, my back. And then he says one time that she said, I love you, Daddy, I think, or something like that. And then, his other last memory was her coming up with big tears in her eyes, saying, but I want to be with you. So let's hear what Don says to Chris about his last memory with Summer the day he woke up on June 15th, 2021.
Where was Summer that morning?
She was right next to me.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, like what? I mean,
well, you tell me those memories.
She usually plays all day, and then she would always ask me, say, Dad, will you take me to bed? Because I'm tired, and so I'd always take her downstairs and I put put her in bed and cover her real good, make sure the doors are locked and everything like that, and get her to sleep. And then, I might stay up for a little while longer or whatever. But she would always want to go to bed a little bit early, more early than us.
And what?
I wonder if that's because they stayed up partying so much, and Summer probably, like any other kid, got tired before it got super late, and they probably wanted to stay up late all night and get messed up. That's just my opinion.
And what time did she go to bed the night before?
Probably about 8:30, maybe 9, something like that.
Okay, and what time did you go to bed?
Not probably shortly after.
So when you got down there, was she already in bed?
Yeah, she.
So he says they probably stayed up really late or whatever, but then when he asks when he went to bed, he's like, well, probably shortly after. So does he even really remember? I don't feel like there was much of a routine in that house.
She was asleep
in your bed, i.e.,
Yep.
your Candace. What is that, a king or a queen down there? I can't remember.
It's a king.
Okay, so she's sound asleep, or is she awake?
Sound asleep.
Okay, and you get in, and then what do you recall about?
I'll be right there. I'll make it short. Just give me a minute. Give me a few minutes.
Okay,
Maybe. Okay. Okay, I'm fine.
that's fine. So
Everybody's giving me hell because I'm trying to talk to y'all. I mean, you know how it is.
Candace does this all the time, and she always sounds like a child in the background, and she always sounds like she's really intoxicated too. She'll be like, Donnie, get off of there. And why though? Why can't he be on here talking about Summer? Whenever Candace comes on here, she doesn't even talk about Summer. At least Don's trying to talk about her.
yeah, I'm a lightning rod. It's all good though, because they don't trust what maybe you may be saying is maybe heard in different ways. Right?
Everything that's happened. I mean, it's been bad.
So you get in the car, you go to work. What time do you get to work around?
I'm not sure. It takes me an hour to drive out there, so 45 minutes or so.
Okay, so you're probably there by 8?
Probably.
And when you got up, where was Candace at 7 a.m.?
She was still asleep next to Summer.
What time, if you recall, did she come to bed that evening?
About the same time I did, I'd say.
So around 9 o'clock the night before?
9 or 10, something like that.
Now, in the past, you told me she used to hit,
So Chris is asking a lot of really good questions, and I wish that other creators that talk to them would ask good questions like this too. Some of them do. There are people that have interviewed Don that have also asked good questions, but there are some panels that they seem very comfortable on that they never get asked good questions like this. And it's just surprising to see Don come up knowing he was probably going to get asked questions like this, and he was probably going to be caught off guard with something, and he probably knew that coming up, and he still came up anyways. So it makes you wonder, is Candace really the guilty one, and Don's just trying to steer the narrative to protect her? But do you really think that he would do that? Or I don't know. I feel like he had to have had some involvement. I feel like if he really didn't know by now, he would have figured it out. And I just feel like he was trying too hard to drive a narrative in the very beginning that he didn't have anything to do with it. I feel like, if anything, he's the one that took Summer off that hill. And that's just how I feel.
Around 5 o'clock every night, and then she'd kind of zone out. Is that still in play here, or is that
5 o'clock every night?
Huh?
5 o'clock every night. I don't understand.
Well, no, that she would, take the load off of the day by, maybe having a drink or something, maybe hitting a bowl or something to that effect, back in the day during that time. I mean,
Well, we used to drink a little, but we never had any problems with we keep it pretty much at a minimum. We never had like real alcohol problems.
Not according to what we've heard to other people. According to what we've heard from other people, Candace drank a lot and every single night. That's an alcoholic. And we've heard that you both were using other things too. Don, we've heard that you were a junkie. People don't just stop doing that shit out of nowhere and still live like that. I mean, you just don't see that. You don't see someone just still live like a junkie, but they're not a junkie anymore. You see people clean up and do better for themselves. That's why I don't think that you ever cleaned up and did better for yourself.
So all this happened, and then it got pretty bad.
Okay.
But,
So you recall maybe around 9 o'clock, give or take, right?
yeah,
That
but
she.
we're gonna have to speed this up. I mean, we need to get something. I mean, we've already been through all this.
Honestly, Don, this is for you, not necessarily us. Like we're just
I care about Summer.
I mean, that's what I said. There's a lot of missing kids.
Well, yeah, there are, and I've been part of it for 40 years.
Yeah, what's going on?
You're preaching to the choir, and that's why I'm.
Why so often does he always have to try to take the spotlight off of Summer? That's a red flag. And I'm surprised that he even says that kind of stuff. He should know that's a red flag. You don't take the spotlight off of Summer. This is a show about Summer. Make it all about her. No offense to any other missing kids, but when it's about her, make it about her. Don't talk about other missing kids. You can do that another time. This is about Summer.
I'm trying to help you.
Okay, well, I mean, here's the thing. A lot of people on your chat said they want me to tell the truth. Okay, well, we've always told the truth, but nothing has wavered in our story.
Right. The story is consistent with a couple of. I mean, you know, and I know. I mean, and everybody knows. I mean, they've heard it. Unfortunately, sometimes people make mistakes making statements. I mean, that's not an uncommon situation.
Well, I mean, I'm telling you the best that I can from my memory, the way it all happened. I wasn't there when Summer was missing, but I can tell you what I know from my heart and Candace's heart and what she's been through. And I've never seen anybody so tore up in my life. And I feel very, very sorry for her.
So let's clear
all off. All the drama. Yes.
Can we clear up the 911 rumors?
Okay.
Where, the call, to 911, and then you hear the dispatcher say that mom went on a walk. What did Candace tell you she said?
Yeah, I don't know why
So when the 911 operator said the mom had went for a walk or a run, they said both. I think they said walk and then they said a run, or it might have been vice versa, but they definitely said walk or a run. So I don't know if she maybe said she walked over to the camper and they misunderstood that as she went on a walk, or maybe Candace literally said, I was out on a run and I came back and I couldn't find my daughter. Who knows? It's hard to tell. She probably doesn't even remember what she said.
How that got confused like that, because Candace, I mean, she's got 4 kids there. I mean, I don't know how that got misconstrued or whatever, like it did, but it was miscommunication somehow. I don't know how that happened exactly. I'd have to ask Candace, but it was just a miscommunication because she never went on a walk. Mm-hmm. What she said she helped mom with her knee brace, and she was always helping her mother with all kinds of things. She's getting older, and I'm sure she was telling the exact truth.
When in some of the rough interviews that you've been with, because you were interviewed, I'm sure, by the card team, by the FBI and Hawkins, TBI, everybody, right?
That's right.
Okay, yeah. And they wanted you to do a poly.
Yeah, we all 3 done polygraphs, and me and Candace passed our polygraph.
Right. But not the first one. I mean,
well, the reason that we couldn't do nothing with the first one, we could not sleep. We didn't get no sleep at all for. You should know.
Yeah.
When you take a polygraph, they want you to be real calm. They put all them devices on you and everything. You to be alert for this test, and that makes sense,
Yeah.
Walk off the end of a beach creek and go over the mountain and block that. I'm thinking in my head and trying to tell them she's not here, and it's like.
Sorry, I just realized I was running out of time, and we'd already heard about him talking about the polygraph test, so I kind of skipped over that part.
They couldn't hear me. You
Right.
know, it's,
Okay, but that's you. What were you and Candace talking about?
you know, I really can't remember. We were just mostly miserable and feeling a lot of pain, knowing our baby's gone, and just hoping that something happens and hoping these police can find her quickly. But you know, they're wanting to question us, maybe even keeping us separate. Maybe, you know, kind of.
Okay.
Looking through our house, you know, and then the what you call a team forensics team
But he doesn't answer the question, what were him and Candace talking about?
shows up, and
Okay.
they're asking hard questions. They're wanting
What kind of questions were they asking you, Don? Help me understand that so I know what frame of mind they were in.
Well, at one point they told Candace, and I probably shouldn't say this, what I'm going to. And they kind of the TBIs, you know, says, we want to know what you did with your daughter or something like that. And Candace went off and told them, "F you." She had tears in her eyes. She just pretty much, you know, go to hell, F off. I mean, and they just like shook their head like that's the kind of response I was looking for.
So apparently TBI asked Candace, what'd you do with Summer? And she was basically told him to F off and screw off, and they were like, good, that's the answer we were looking for.
Kind of thing like that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. How did you respond? Did you hear that question?
No, they had me somewhere else that question me. Like I said, I think it's kind of keeping us apart.
So did she?
So, yeah, they were just keeping them apart, obviously, because they were probably trying to do the right thing in the first place and didn't give them the benefit of the doubt, which they shouldn't have, which tells me that they were probably treating it as there could have been some kind of foul play involving the parents involved in Summer being reported missing. So, because of the fact that they kept them separate and they were questioning Candace like that, just because they said, good, that's the answer we were looking for, doesn't mean that they believed her necessarily.
She share that information with you then?
Yes.
Okay. And how about you when you finally had a chance, brother, to talk to her one-on-one? What were you asking her, if you remember?
I don't really remember. We're just both in shock.
So Don says Summer was so brilliant and smart, and they can't believe she is gone. He says they're both in shock. In my opinion, if they were truly in shock, which they truly should be if they really think their daughter, Summer, was abducted, but if they were truly in shock, they would not have to say it, but you'd be able to tell it. You know what I mean? They don't come across to me as shocked. Don and Candace both come across to me as the opposite of shocked, which is always been another red flag. Don asks how he kept the boys from freaking out. Chris asks Don how he kept the boys from freaking out. Don says he just tried to comfort them the best he could. He says Josie was old enough to understand, so it was bothering him some. Don says he was in tears, and Josie came up and said, Dad, it's not my fault. And Don said he told him, I know, son. This bothers me so bad because I do see Don as a narcissist, and I can't see past it because I see it so strongly in him. This is a part where I think Don is trying to cast blame upon his sons, like he is casting doubt in people's minds on his own boy. And he keeps saying it. That's not right if you ask me. I wonder how Tim Mullen would feel about that. He seems to care so much. Chris asks how Tim Mullen got involved. Don says he's just a good friend that turned out to be a good friend that's been through this stuff pretty much all his life and understands it and is trying to help me understand YouTube and the drama and all that kind of stuff. So I think he's just saying Tim knows all about the media and understands how to guide them through it during Summer's disappearance. But why would someone need that, especially when they're a suspect? Don doesn't take Tim quite... Doesn't that make Tim quite suspect, considering he is the one that sought Don out? It's been pure hell, Don says. So Tim and Don are best friends, and they hang out and play games and take stupid pictures to be smartasses with on social media and talk about their trip to California and how much they miss their daughter that they can't ever seem to talk about with any compassion or truth. Some of the things they say about Summer sound so fabricated. Why does Tim entertain that? When Don says Summer would come with big tears and be like, Daddy, I just want to be with you. I don't believe him. I just don't. I don't feel it's genuine. I'm not saying Summer didn't love her dad because that was her dad, but I'm saying I don't believe she said that to Don. Not like that. Chris asks, when did Robin and David get there? Without answering, Don says they had the police van parked right out front for like a week and the road was blocked off on Ben Hill for like 2 weeks. Nobody in or out for a long time, he said. The question was, when did Robin and David get there? But okay. Maybe he didn't know the answer to that, so he just skipped over it, or maybe he wasn't listening. I believe David got there before Robin and was there for a little while before Robin arrived around 9 or maybe even a little after 9, if my memory serves me correctly. Josh asks, do you think Josie felt that way, as in guilty because he's the oldest or what? Don says, I think it's because he saw how heartbroken him and Candace were and he wasn't showing them love like he probably should have, and he wasn't handling it too well. He said, I don't know why, he just came up to me and said it's not my fault. So Don admits that he wasn't showing love like he should have. Did that happen often when something bad would happen, or is it just because Summer's disappearance weighed so heavily on him? I think Don puts too much emphasis on Josie saying it's not his fault, and I think Josie had nothing to do with it. I think Don and Candace are responsible regardless. But I don't know if that's why he felt guilty, Don says. Maybe Josie felt guilty from Candace hollering at him, what did you do, what did you do, if we can believe Jody Sue. I think there's a lot of truth in what Jody says. I think there's also a lot of bias and exaggeration and probably some lies too for content and attention or whatever. But she has said some things about Don and Candace that have raised some flags for me for sure. Chris says, I want to tell you I appreciate having a civil conversation with you, and we might not see eye to eye, but that doesn't mean we can't have a civil conversation. Right, and I appreciate that Chris pointed that out to Don. So, Don says we can do this another time, help find my daughter and other kids. That'd be awesome. Don often says this about other kids, but Don, you have a big problem that you already don't have enough people helping you with already. Your daughter needs as much help as you can possibly get her. You should be her biggest advocate, you and her mother. Just fight for Summer until Summer is found and gets justice, then you can focus on other children. If something comes up along the way and you're given an opportunity to help another missing child, then take it by all means. But now just focus on Summer. That's my opinion. That's great to want to help other children if that's truly the case, but this is about your daughter. You're always taking the attention off of her. That's also yet another red flag. You should take all you can get for Summer. You're her father. Don says he will think about it if they will take the help from the Cold Case Foundation, which it seems they have turned down. Seems neither one of them will admit they both don't want the help. They just blame the other for saying no or not saying yes. Josh says there is nothing wrong with having this conversation, and if anyone doesn't want him to have it, then they don't have Don's best interest in mind, which I have to agree with because Don's best interest should be Summer's best interest, whether he is guilty or not. Don says he will holler at them later and hangs up. Josh appreciates Don coming up and talking. He says Don knows how he feels. That doesn't mean that he's right, and that doesn't mean that they can't be civil. Then they continue on with the video of Don talking to Times News with Jeff Bobo. So, all right. I've got like 30 seconds. Thank you for being here for Summer. appreciate you, and I hope you all have a very nice day. Remember, this was from Josh at the Lab with Chris McDonough. If you want to see the video, just go to the Labs channel, and it'll be on there from April 19th. All right. Peace out, you guys. It was nice chatting with you. Bye.